Shalom, and welcome to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. This is a recording of a Shabbat sermon with Rabbi Rebecca Schatz.
Living in Israel, I experienced a ceremony I had never encountered before, a ma'avar ceremony, bridging the evening's end of Yom HaZikaron to the beginning of the celebration of Yom HaAtzmaut. Growing up, these two holidays were celebrated at school during the day. Yes, still back-to-back days, but not with any close kiss of change from one going into the other. We would discuss how Israel's mourning is then followed up by a day of celebration because she is a country that holds both at all times. The dissonance of war and coexistence, the reality of fighting and loving, and the constant questions of why and how. The liminal space created by this ma'avar ceremony was the first time I was aware of such a palpable, tangible experience of the expression holding both things at once. This week's double parsha, Ta'azriya Metzora, is not a quotable parsha. It is, as Gabriel shared with us beautifully, a parsha all about bodily secretions and laws around oozing parts and how to stay close spiritually, but distance yourself around human beings. So instead of continuing to talk about this parsha ad literal nauseam, I figured we would explore why this parsha exists in this moment of Torah at all. Last week, Shmini. This week, Ta'azriya Metzora. And next week, Acharei Mot Kedoshim. Seemingly a bizarre week this week to read about bodily functions, when the parshiot surrounding this Shabbat are about intentional space, intimate closeness to God, and the power and holiness of grief. The last verse of Parshat Shmini last week is Lehavdil ben hatameh uvein hatahor uvein hachaya hanechelet uvein hachaya asher lo te'echel, to differentiate, to have a havdalah between the tameh and the tahor, between the living things that may be eaten and the living things that may not be eaten. We needed, by the end of last week's parsha, to understand what it meant for us to be in a world where there are things we should not do and other things that are available to us in permissive and powerful ways. In this verse's case, it's what to eat and what not to eat. David Kerwin in 2022 wrote in the Times of Israel, quote, when discussing the transition between Shmini and Parshat Ta'azriya, we saw that a common theme was contact with the dead. First dead animals, then humans, who had conditions that were associated with death. In Parshat Shmini, he continues, the Mishkan was dedicated, and it was meant to be the center of worship and holiness for the nation. But it had just been impurified by the deaths of Nadav and Avihu. So before the Torah could continue with the laws of the service, as detailed in Parshat Acharei Mot next week, it needed to discuss laws of impurity and death in between. For Kerwin, the reason for our parsha this week is to understand how we are to handle the dead and other categories of tameh that may keep us from this Mishkan that we just built. Our goal is to be in the Mishkan, Kerwin teaches, so we should know how to maintain that closeness. Our parsha this week begins with Daber el bnei Yisrael le'emor isha ki tazriya ve'yalda zachar ve'tam'a shiv'at yamim ki mei nidat davata titma. Speak to the Israelite people, when a woman in childbirth bears a boy, she shall be tameh 7 days. She shall be tameh as at the time of her condition of menstrual separation. So we go from what items of food are tameh and unable to be eaten to what times in our human experience do we become tameh and therefore separated from closeness in the Mishkan or our temple. This is a complicated verse that we are not going to spend any time on, but I do believe that there is a beautiful way to understand that this liminal space of post-birth and pre-returning to social life is a gift to the mother and not a punishment. In an article written by Nina Rubin and Rabbi Hillel Katsir in 2020 called Tahor and Tameh, A New Understanding of Ritual Purity and Impurity, They wrote for the organization Kavod V'Nichum, and they discussed the modern translations of the words tameh and tahor, which Gabriel did earlier for us. They share, quote, instead of a binary, it makes more sense to look at the range of tameh to tahor as a continuum. At one end of the scale, a person is tahor, boundaried and complete, fully present, possessing an entire sense of self. And at the other end, a person who is tameh has had their boundaries breached by experiences such as intimacy or trauma. They feel incomplete or not fully themselves, but they are blended with others. Being tameh is being spiritually vulnerable at those times in our lives when we have intimate contact with other people or with God, or allow ourselves to go outside the religious boundaries that help us to define our whole self. We necessarily spend our lives traveling along that continuum between boundedness and vulnerability. The Jewish tradition has labeled tahor as the desirable trait and tameh as undesirable. But the things that make us tameh are often connected with individual intimacy. Sex, giving birth, assisting others, death. Any time you are intimately involved, you have the possibility of being spiritually vulnerable. Tameh is not a negative state because it is actually a goal for many people to open their hearts, which can lead to intimate and spiritual experiences. But intimate encounters leave us in a vulnerable state, and so, as the tradition recognizes, we can't stay there for long periods of time. This parsha, Tazria Metzora, is the liminal space we need between holy space and vulnerable emotional connection. We are in a parsha talking about the most intimate of life's experiences and the need to understand them, not to think of them as bad or unclean, but rather necessary and intentional and special. This Ma'avar ceremony in Israel was set in the city of Jerusalem on a plaza overlooking the old city and the walls surrounding her. We sat on the ground, feeling the cold stone under our bodies and singing tunes from Seudah Shlishit, tunes that are often heard as sad or yearning or evocative of a time that held pain and yet hope for a better future. After about 30 minutes of singing, we stood up to the largest Havdalah ceremony I have ever experienced. We said the blessings over the traditional Havdalah components, but transitioning us from mourning to celebration, and not from kadosh to chol. Because in some ways, they are both kadosh, the mourning and the celebration. And they are, unfortunately, especially in Israel, both chol, mundane and regular. The mourning does not come without complicated feelings and questions, and the celebration does not come without wonder and reflection. After a tearful Havdalah, the mob of people turned into circles of dancing, and all of a sudden we were not crying, we were sweating. We were jumping and elated, not having forgotten the few minutes before, but in recognition, celebrating life. A liminal space. Both sides of the moment powerful, both sides of the moment challenging, and the in-between just as necessary. Next week's parsha, which we will read starting this afternoon, says, Vaydaber Adonai Moshe acharei mot shnei bnei Aharon bekirvatam lifnei Adonai vayamutu. Adonai spoke to Moses after the death of the two sons of Aaron who died when they drew too close to the presence of Adonai. A verse that should have all of you wondering, what? Too close to God? Is that possible? Isn't that the goal? To be as close as possible to God. However, after reading this week's parsha, we understand that too close is often the issue. Too much of the tahor is detrimental because it means that we're not interacting with the world that needs us, with the community that serves us, with the loved ones who care for us. Should Aaron's sons have died? Probably not. It seems quite extreme. However, the Torah is dramatizing what can happen if we do not understand how to hold both and how to live in those liminal spaces. How to live a life of tameh, but take breaks to find the spiritual closeness by changing our status to tahor. How to mourn loved ones and find ways to celebrate their contributions to our world and to our life. How to live ben kodesh lechol, between that which is holy and the holiness in the mundane all the time. Ta'azriya Metzora is exactly where it should be in the Torah. We needed a reminder of balance, of living life to find holiness, not living only in spiritual search and missing out on life. Doing tahara for a dead body makes those in the holy act of Chevra Kadisha tameh. Having an intimate, respectful physical relationship with a loving partner makes you tameh, and you find holiness and connection in the life you create together. We live in the in-between moments, and our status changes to focus us, but not to forget the experiences of life before or after, just to explain them and make each moment worth living to the fullest.
You've been listening to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. If you enjoy these podcasts, we invite you to write a review on the Apple Podcast website or wherever you get your podcasts. For more information on Temple Beth Am, Los Angeles, go to www.tbala.org.